I wasn't allowed to talk to the boy with the wings. That was my brother. But I couldn't even call him that anymore. Mom said he was supposed to be some kind of angel. But I knew what angels were supposed to look like, the perfect, shining ones from movies, or the creepy, otherworldly ones people talk about from old stories. He didn't look anything like that. He was more like a crow, a grotesque, bird-like creature with the body of a teenage guy and the unsettling features of a sick bird. My brother didn't even have a name. To our parents, he was like a stray cat that just wandered into their lives. They didn't love him or really want him around. On the other hand, they also told me he was an angel, a once-in-a-lifetime chance to witness something that broke all the rules of nature, with powers beyond anything I could understand. Just like my sister, he was one of those lost children of the sky. Ethereal beings who had fallen from the heavens ages ago and decided to stay here on Earth. He'd saved my life when I was a baby. I was so young, I don't remember it, but Mom likes to remind me every year on my birthday that I wouldn't be here if it weren't for the angels in our attic. My adopted brother and sister. I was born too early with almost no chance of surviving. Mom said she prayed nonstop, begging for a miracle, and then those two beings came to her, giving me life with their divine power. When I made it through, Mom begged them to stay and protect me until I was old enough to take care of myself. My earliest memory? It's of those angels watching over me, keeping me safe. Back then, they looked so angelic, so innocent. Or maybe that's just how I remember it. My brother had huge white wings, like a swan, while my sisters were more of a grayish color. They'd smile and laugh, and for a while we really were siblings. But as I grew older, I saw less and less of them. Mom would pull them away in the middle of whatever we were doing, and then they'd be gone for days, sometimes weeks. I thought they had finally flown away for good. It made me sad, I guess. I was just a kid, and my older siblings had disappeared. Then, one day, I started hearing sounds from upstairs. The familiar sound of their wings scraping against the old wooden floors and the cracking ceiling. Mom and Dad told me my siblings were up in the attic now. It was too dangerous for them to be around us, so they had to stay up there, safe and out of sight. That meant no more playing with them, and definitely no more talking about them to anyone else. Mom was pretty strict about that. "They're magical beings, Nini," she told me one night as I was getting ready for bed. "There are a lot of bad people out there who would want to use your brother and sister for bad things. So we can't talk about them. Okay?" The next day at school, I drew a picture of the two of them playing with me. At the end of class, my teacher pulled me aside. "Am I in trouble?" I asked, feeling a little nervous. She smiled and motioned for me to sit down. No, you're not in trouble. I just wanted to talk to you about the drawing you made." I shifted in my seat, knowing that I wasn't supposed to be talking about the angels. I wasn't allowed to bring them up to anyone. "This is a very nice drawing, Nini," she said, holding it up. "Are they angels?" I nodded, practically jumping out of my seat. "Yep, they're my brother and sister." Her face went serious, and she leaned back in her chair. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to." "No, my siblings are alive," I said quickly. "They're angels, and they live in the attic." I remember her smile getting a little too wide. She leaned in closer, taking the drawing from me. "Do they have names?" I shook my head. "No," I said it plainly. "They're not allowed names." Her smile wavered, just for a second. "What do you mean, not allowed names, sweetie?" Mrs. Johnson was my favorite teacher, usually, but I could tell she was starting to get uncomfortable. I pretended I didn't notice her fingers twitching at the edges of my drawing. I repeated exactly what Mom had said. "Because they're angels," I giggled. "They don't need names like people do." She nodded slowly, handing me back the picture. "Sweetie, I know I shouldn't ask this, and I might get in trouble, but can we keep this between us?" I nodded, feeling a knot twist in my stomach. I probably shouldn't have said anything. "Okay," she whispered. Then she leaned even closer, her face growing darker. "Let me take a step back for a second. This was a couple of months ago, and Mrs. Johnson had been gone for a while. She used to be the kind of teacher who was always bubbly, always excited to teach us. But when she came back, weeks later, she was different, distant, like something was missing inside of her. Her smiles didn't reach her eyes anymore. And even when she was sitting right in front of me, grinning that huge, fake grin, I could see how troubled she really was. I felt this weird guilt, like maybe my siblings, being angels, could somehow help fix whatever was hurting her. But Mom's rules wouldn't ever allow that. "Nini, do you think you could tell me what these angels look like?" she asked one day. I shrugged. "Well, they have wings." "No, Nini," Mrs. Johnson interrupted, pointing at the drawing. She ran her finger across my sister's stick figure face. I had drawn her hair in a fuzzy mess of red with crayons, and my brother's curls were just a brown cloud. I'd never seen their halos, but I drew them anyway, floating above their heads, along with their big, feathered wings. "What do these angels look like?" she pressed. I was about to answer, but then Mom poked her head in. "Nini, time to go home, sweetie," she called, smiling at Mrs. Johnson, who, to my surprise, slipped the drawing into her pocket. Mom definitely noticed her trying to hide it. I saw her stiffen up a little, arms crossing over her chest. "Mrs. Johnson, is something wrong?" My teacher jumped up, her smile plastered back on, but it was so fake. "I was just talking to Nini about her homework," she said, voice shaking a little. Mom gave her a slow nod, her expression not changing. "I'm sorry about your children," she said, clearing her throat. "They were so young. They were my babies." Mrs. Johnson's voice cracked. "I'm sure you understand a mother's grief. Please excuse me." Mom didn't back down. "I'm here if you need to talk," she said softly. "We all know Adam had his struggles with, well, drugs." Mrs. Johnson's smile disappeared, and I could see the shift. She wasn't just my teacher anymore. She was a parent hurt and angry. "I don't need your pity," she snapped. "If I hear one more person tell me everything will be okay, I'm going to lose my mind," she continued. "Thank you, but I don't want your pity. I don't want your sympathy." Her voice broke, and I instantly felt like I should hug her, but I didn't know what to say. I watched as she opened my laptop, trying to ignore Mom. "If you're just going to waste my time, you might as well leave," Mrs. Johnson muttered, glaring at me. Then, she slapped my drawing onto the desk. "Your daughter has quite the imagination." Mom's eyes went wide when she saw it. She grabbed my wrist and gently tugged me out of the room. On the way to the car, I asked, "Why was Mrs. Johnson so upset?" Mom didn't answer right away, leaving the car filled with this heavy silence. I knew she still had the drawing. I knew I was in trouble. I braced myself for the lecture, but instead, she surprised me. She pulled into a drive-thru and got me chocolate ice cream. While I ate, she cleared her throat. "Mrs. Johnson lost her children," Mom said quietly, her grip tightening on the steering wheel. "She needs a miracle. And when you drew those angels, you gave her a bit of hope." Mom pulled the drawing out of her pocket, and I froze, watching as she ripped it up and tossed it out the window. I watched the pieces land in a puddle. My brother's crayon smile disappeared under the murky water. "Nini, did you tell Mrs. Johnson about your brother and sister?" I didn't answer, feeling my ice cream trying to come back up. "Nini," Mom said again, her voice sharp. I shook my head. "No, I lied." But when she gave me that look, I cracked. "I just told her there are angels in the attic." Mom nodded slowly, her eyes narrowing. "Did you tell her they were real angels?"
No.
"Did she ask what they looked like?" I hated this interrogation, my eyes burning with tears. "I don't know," I muttered.
No.
"She just liked my drawing." Mom curled her lip, her face hardening. "Are you sure, Nina? Because if you're lying, bad people might come and take your siblings." She only called me Nina when I was in real trouble. "Yes," I practically shouted. Mom leaned back in her seat, letting out a long breath of relief. "That's good," she whispered, then reached over, grabbing my hands and squeezing them tight. Because we can't let anyone take them, okay? They're your angels, sweetheart. After that, I wasn't allowed to even mention the angels in our attic anymore. If I slipped up, even accidentally, by mentioning the angels, I was sent straight to my room. The thing was, no matter how many times I was told to forget about them or pretend they didn't exist, I just couldn't. They were my brother and sister, and whether they were angels or not didn't matter to me. I remember telling my aunt about them when I was about 10, during Thanksgiving dinner. It was a slip of the tongue, really. We were all going around the table sharing our wishes for the new year, and when it was my turn, I raised my glass of juice, copying my parents' toast, and said, "I wish I could see my brother and sister who are in the attic again." Aunt Jules choked on her wine, and I noticed the look she shot Mom. She was already a little tipsy, her cheeks bright red, and laughing way too much for someone her age. Mom had already placed several glasses of water in front of her, but she wasn't paying attention to them. "Frida," Aunt Jules giggled, winking at my mom. "Is there something you need to tell me?" Mom slowly put down her own glass, lips still pressed against it. "Jules, you know how my daughter has a wild imagination. They're just like imaginary friends." Aunt Jules straightened up, her smile faltering. "That's not exactly what I wanted to talk about." She turned to me, and I saw the color drain from her face. "Nini, why don't you go upstairs and play for a while? I need to talk to your mom." "No, I'm old enough," I said, flashing her a big smile. "Nina, you're 8 years old," Dad grumbled between bites of mashed potatoes. I stayed where I was, not moving an inch. I thought if I stayed perfectly still, the adults might not notice it was way past my bedtime.
"Nina."
Mom's voice was a warning now. "Upstairs. Now." Reluctantly, I trudged upstairs. When I tried to eavesdrop, hiding on the stairs, Dad scooped me up and carried me all the way to my room, tucking me into bed. I tried to stay awake, straining my ears to catch their conversation, but I eventually fell asleep. I woke up to something cold trickling down my face. When I opened my eyes, I froze. A small puddle of red was forming on my ceiling. I sat up quickly, wiping my face with my hand. Blood. And then, a single feather floated down and landed on my cheek. I jumped out of bed, my heart racing. Instead of calling for my parents, I grabbed my pink chair from my vanity, dragged it beneath the red stain, and climbed onto it. Standing on my tiptoes, I reached up and brushed my fingers through the scarlet stain on the ceiling. I knocked 3 times. To my surprise, there was an answer, 2 knocks. "Are you okay?" I called, pressing my face against the ceiling so my voice would carry. Another knock. No. A chill ran down my spine, icy and sharp. I knocked again. "Are you hurt?" "Yes," came the soft, strained sob from above. I nearly fell off the chair, hearing my brother's voice. When I really listened, cutting through all the background noise, the hum of my light and my parents arguing downstairs, I could hear his sobs, soft but breaking through the silence. I hopped down off the chair, and as I did, I heard the sound of his wings dragging across the floor. "Nini." His voice was weak, like he was pressing his face against the floor. "What are you doing?" I made my way to the door, my fingers gripping the ornate handle. "I'm going to tell Mom that you're hurt," I said. "You need help." "Wait, don't." There was a frantic urgency in his voice that made me freeze. It's just a broken wing," he whispered.
"I'm okay."
"It'll heal." I didn't know what to do, so I stayed where I was, balanced on my chair, keeping him company for hours. I told him stories from my favorite books, and he seemed to enjoy them. He even knew the characters' names before I could say them. As I started to feel sleepy, I dragged a blanket from my bed and slumped into the chair. "What's your name?" There was an uncomfortable pause before he answered. "I don't know. Mom said angels don't have names," I said. "Correct. Okay. So, can I name you?" I heard the sound of him shifting, rolling onto his side. "Sure." I glanced at my stuffed lion sitting on my pillows. "Simba," I declared. He chuckled, and I realized I had never heard an angel laugh before. sounded just like mine. That's not a proper name. Peter, I said, frowning at my scrappy copy of Narnia. Nah, he sighed. I don't think that's me. I grabbed a random book, flicking through the pages. Okay, then, how about Jude? Jude. He dragged the name through his mouth, testing it out. I like it. Excited, I nodded. What about our sister? Lily. A small squeak echoed from the corner of the attic, and I froze. I like the name Lily, came the soft voice of the angel girl. I felt a rush of pride as they started to feel more like siblings to me. It was the first time I truly felt connected to them, like they were mine. Soon after, I started sneaking food up to the attic. At first, it was just salted crackers and holy water from Mom's fountain. But angels get hungry, and they had a particular fondness for snacks and junk food. I started small, slipping food through the cracks in the floorboards to avoid being caught. But over time, I grew bolder. I began hauling my old Nintendo DS and an ancient game of Monopoly up there, too. To get there, I had to squeeze myself through a tight gap after climbing a shaky wooden ladder and removing several of the floorboards. It was an effort, but once inside, I was greeted with an entirely new world. My eyes adjusted, and I could see more clearly in the dim, suffocating light. The moment my eyes took in the full scene, my DS slipped from my fingers. I had never been inside the attic before. When I'd asked what was in there, Mom told me it was just for storage. But this wasn't the smell of old things, it was antiseptic. Could you put the floorboards back? Jude's voice trembled in the cold air. I'm cold. The words cut through the silence, sending a chill through me. I turned toward them, and my heart nearly stopped. There they were, Jude and Lily. I hadn't seen them since I was a child, since they'd been taken away when I was playing. I had grown up with their voices bleeding through the ceiling, imagining them as older, distant figures. But now they were exactly the same age. They were in their early 20s or maybe late teens. The same angels who used to play with me when I was little. But their appearance now was haunting. Their faces were pale, gaunt, almost skeletal. I had always thought their wings were beautiful, majestic, like swans. I remembered them as otherworldly, a perfect thing. But this wasn't what I remembered. My breaths grew shallow, and a cold shiver ran down my spine. I wasn't even sure I was looking at angels anymore. Their wings, once perfect, were now tattered and shredded, barely attached to their backs. They sagged heavily, clearly weighing them down. I remembered my brother's wings as flawless when I was a child. They were magical, unexplained, and beautiful. But now I could see the horrible truth. Jude's wings were nothing like that. In the harsh white light above me, I could clearly see where his naked spine protruded, splitting in two. Horrific, feathered appendages sprouted from the torn flesh, weaving through his filthy t-shirt. It wasn't beauty, it was something far darker. I hesitated, taking a careful step forward. I saw them both stiffen, like they were afraid I was going to hurt them. Mom had lied. That thought repeated in my head, again and again. She said they had blankets, food, and books. She said they were happy staying in the attic, locked away. But none of it was true. Not anymore. The more I stood there, the more I processed everything around me. It became painfully clear. This room above our house was not a sanctuary for the angels. It wasn't a place of safety. The fluorescent light above was harsh, cold, and almost painful to look at. The walls and ceiling were a sterile, clinical white like a hospital room. But it wasn't just the surroundings that disturbed me. It was the angels themselves. The sight of them was out of place in this clinical environment. They were chained, cruel, heavy chains biting into their ankles and wrists. The chains bound them to the walls, attaching them to the very foundation of the house. I took another step forward, feeling my heart race. Something was sticking from Lily's arm, a long plastic tube feeding into her. I moved closer, dread crawling up my spine. What I saw made my stomach twist. Blood was trickling down Jude's back, and another long tube was stuck directly into the incision where his spine split in two. I forced myself to look away from the metal clamp wedged into his flesh, piercing through the slithers of skin, keeping his wings shuddering and struggling to move. They were still trying to unfurl, but the feathers were no longer graceful. They were like grotesque flaps, twitching with every move. Lily was sitting with her back against the wall, her strawberry blonde hair falling over her tired eyes. I could see a single plastic tube stuck into her arm, and her wings unfolded gently when she shifted, though she looked exhausted. It was then that the truth hit me. Mom and Dad weren't just keeping the angels hidden away. They were experimenting on them. "It's okay," Jude murmured softly, his voice hoarse. He nudged Lily gently, the movement sluggish. "It's just Nini." Lily's eyes, half-lidded and struggling to stay open, locked with mine. Slowly, I knelt in front of them, my eyes stinging with unshed tears. I reached out to push the matted, filthy brown hair from Jude's face, trying not to cry at the sight of him, so broken and weak. Before I could say anything, he weakly gestured to the DS I had dropped on the floor earlier. His voice was barely a slurred whisper, barely audible over the sound of his breathing. I looked at the cruel tube sticking from his spine, my heart breaking. "Does that have Mario?" His question caught me off guard, and I shuffled back, grabbing the DS. I wiped the dust off the screen before switching it on. His eyes lit up and I held it up so he could see the screen. "No," I told him, "but I do have Nintendogs." Jude's grin was small but real, though I wasn't expecting the sharp teeth jutting from his gums. "Sounds fun," he said, his voice strained but still light. He extended his chained wrists toward me. "Do you want to play?" I had so many questions, but in that moment, looking at my brother, so pained but still trying to be normal, I swallowed my words. I stayed with them, playing for hours as the sky darkened outside. When I finally started packing up to leave, something inside me couldn't resist. My heart pounded in my chest as I moved closer to Jude. I reached for the tube connected to his spine, but before I could touch it, his wings jerked violently, and his eyes shot wide open. "Don't!" His voice was a snarl, low and threatening, and I froze. Jude backed away quickly, his wings twitching as he struggled against the clamp still embedded in his back. His breathing was sharp, and his fingernails, almost like claws, scratched against the wooden boards beneath him. "Don't fucking touch me," he spat, his voice low and raw. "Do you understand?" I didn't move, standing there, frozen in place. After a moment, his expression softened. His teeth retracted and he looked away. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "It just hurts." I finished for him, choking on my own sob. "Mom and Dad are hurting you." Jude was silent for a moment, his head jerking up suddenly, as if remembering something. "Do you remember that one time when you wanted to fly? You jumped off the bunk bed and broke your arm? You were so scared, but we ran to Mom to fix it. We love you, Nini. We care about you." Tears filled my eyes as I nodded. "But we need help now, too." His words were slow, heavy with the truth I hadn't wanted to face. "Do you have a pen and paper?" I nodded. I'd brought an entire coloring pad for drawing. I handed him a blank piece of paper and a crayon. Jude scribbled something quickly before handing it to me. "Can you call this number?" he whispered, his voice barely above a breath. I nodded eagerly, though my heart was racing with uncertainty. "Why? Is it like part of your job? As an angel?" He looked at me, his face shifting from confusion to a bitter smile. "Yeah, it's a job," he said, though his words felt heavy with a deeper sadness. "I've been here for so long protecting you. I need to check up on the other children too." "Jude," Lily grumbled, nudging him as he rolled his eyes. "Knock it off." "Why?" He shot back, his voice full of irony. "Aren't we just doing our jobs?" That night, I left the attic with a new mission, my heart oddly light. I was going to call the special number, and I was going to help Jude do his job. Mom was busy making dinner, so it was easy to distract her. I made a big fuss about dessert, which bought me some time, while she grumbled to herself, pulling ingredients for cookies from the cupboard. I snuck my mother's phone from her purse, locked myself in the bathroom, and dialed the number. I was so excited, my fingers trembling with anticipation. The dial tone hummed in my ear, and then someone picked up. "Hello." Before I could answer, I heard Mom unlocking the door. She yanked the phone from my hands. "Nini, what are you doing?" she demanded, glancing quickly at the phone screen. "Sorry about that, let me—" She shot me a look, sharp and icy, before quickly walking away, holding the phone to her ear. "Yes, hello? I'm so sorry. My daughter must have dialed the wrong number." "No. I have no idea how she got your number. Have a great night." Mom didn't get mad, though. Instead, she made me cookies. I was nibbling on a warm chocolate one when she leaned against the counter, folding her arms. "Nini, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." I dipped my cookie in fondant, trying to act casual. "I was doing a job." Her eyebrows furrowed. "A job?" I nodded. "One of the angels gave me an angel number, so I could do his job for him." Mom's lip curled, her face suddenly cold. "Okay then, can I have the angel number?" I hesitated, my throat tightening. She sighed. "Nini, I'm sure he would rather an adult be handling his job for him." She extended her hand, her tone hardening. "Sweetie, I don't want to ask again." I handed her the paper with the number on it, the words choking in my throat. "Why are you hurting them?" I asked before I could stop myself. Mom's eyes widened in surprise. "Nini, why on earth would you think we're hurting them?" "I saw them," I said, my voice cracking. "You're hurting their wings. You're doing bad things to them." Mom's expression faltered for a second, then softened. She pulled me into a hug, and I found myself breaking down in her arms, burying my head against her chest. "Nina, sweetie, you're very, very wrong," she whispered, running her fingers through my hair. "They're sick. When they brought you back to life as a child, they were so weak they couldn't fly away. We didn't want to scare you, so we didn't tell you." I nodded, squeezing her tighter, my confusion starting to melt into something that almost felt like understanding. It made sense. They were trying to fix the angel's wings. "Your father and I have been trying to save them," Mom continued softly. "They're powerful, and sometimes we have no choice but to take extra measures. Yes, that includes chaining them." She pulled back slightly, wiping away the tears on my face. "Nina, you need to understand, they're incredibly powerful, and only chains soaked in holy water can keep them contained. When they were younger, they were weaker, but as you saw, they're growing stronger every day." A sharp pang went through my chest. "Then they'll fly away," I whispered. Mom pursed her lips, but her eyes softened, and she gave me another cookie. "Then they'll fly away." After that conversation, I didn't visit the angels for a long time. A part of me was scared of them, scared of their growing power, their potential for destruction. But eventually, I missed them. So, I grabbed snacks from the kitchen, a handful of DS games I knew Jude would love, and snuck out of my room, heading toward the attic. But when I climbed up the wobbly stairs, something was different. The loose floorboards that once led to their hiding place had all been replaced. My heart sank. I thought about knocking on my ceiling to tell them I was there, but when I came home from school, I found my bedroom door locked. "We're redecorating," Mom said with a bright smile. "For now, you'll be staying in our room." That was the last time I had access to my room. When it was finally finished, I noticed something. The ceiling had been completely redone. I tried knocking on it all night, balancing on my chair, desperately hoping for a response. But I never got one. I did hear them, though. In the middle of the night, their anguished screams bled through the walls, sharp and pained, keeping me awake. I could feel the air around me grow thick, as if the house itself could feel their agony. I saw blood seeping through the walls and ceiling. Feathers drifted through the air, a haunting presence in the room. their pain reverberating in the house. One night, I slipped out of bed and stepped on something sharp. My bare feet were pricked by the tattered remnants of their wings, scattered across the floor. I rushed to the faucet to wash my face, but instead of water, thick blood ran out, staining the sink. They were sick enough to almost feel human. I could hear their cries, their desperate pleas for death. Half of me wondered if they were calling for their father. God. Mom told me at breakfast that the angels were gravely ill. She told me to pray for them, so I did, bending over my frosted flakes. I prayed that their father would hear them, just as he had heard me, and that he would save them. Eventually, their cries stopped. Dad said they were stable now, and that's when Mom broke down, tears streaming down her face. As I grew older, I tried to forget. By the time I hit my tweens and then my teens, I was more focused on my own life, on my friends, on figuring out who I was. But still, the angels were there, always lurking in the back of my mind. When I was 18, I left for college, but I came back for the holidays. It was during one of those visits when I finally saw them again. It was hard to ignore the boy with the tattered white wings jutting out from his spine, the slit in his shirt exposing the rawness of his skin. He was dragging himself downstairs, sneaking into our refrigerator. I wasn't sure what version of Jude this was anymore. He was different from the boy I had met in the attic. The angel I had known still resembled something human. He still felt pain, still had something of his past self. But this version of Jude was something else entirely. His talon-like fingernails scraped against his skin, and his spine twisted unnaturally, jutting out from his back like an animal's. He looked more bird than man, his wings enormous, though his blood-drenched shirt clung to his frame, hiding most of his upper body. He was always hunched over, moving slowly, as if each step was a struggle. His once familiar features were hidden beneath thick, dark hair that fell across his eyes, making him look almost unrecognizable. I tried not to focus on the grime caked between his toes or the trail of scarlet leading from the refrigerator to the door, but it was impossible to ignore. He didn't acknowledge me. Instead, he buried his face into a frosted cake Mom had made, shoveling it into his mouth with no regard for the mess he was creating. I couldn't tear my eyes away, a mix of fascination and disgust churning in my stomach as he devoured the cake, his movements reminding me of a crow tearing at bread. When he finally looked up, his eyes met mine, beady and vacant, distant. His gaze didn't linger. He turned to the cupboard, sniffing the air as he reached for something else. Jude. My voice felt foreign, as if the name didn't belong to him anymore. He didn't respond. Instead, he tore open a bag of candy bars, his focus solely on the snack. He ravaged the Snickers bar, shoving it into his mouth as if he hadn't eaten in days. I swallowed back bile, my stomach churning at the sight of him. Jude's sickness had turned him into something grotesque, no longer an angel, but a twisted mockery of both human and celestial. "How old are you?" I asked, my tone casual, though I wasn't sure why. "I'm almost 19, and you've been 19 for most of my life. But you're also an angel, so that would make you, like, old." It was a weak attempt at humor, a fleeting hope that the boy I once knew would somehow resurface. I remembered the times I told him jokes when we were younger, and he actually laughed, genuine, full-bodied laughter. "Jude," I said again. He twisted around, chocolate smeared down his chin. It was then that I noticed it, the way he tilted his head, his beady eyes darting between my face and my lips. He couldn't understand me, at least not fully. He was reading my lips. I stood slowly, my mind racing. Mom and Dad were at the store and I didn't have much time. "If you have wings, why don't you fly away?" Jude dragged his trembling body toward the door, his arms weighed down with snacks. I didn't expect him to laugh, but he did. It wasn't the laugh I remembered. It was more of a bird-like squawk, a sound devoid of the humanity he once had. Instead of speaking, he saluted me with his candy bar and shuffled out of the room, muttering something to himself. 2 weeks later, I saw Lily again. Her wings were massive, far too large for her frail frame. They split her spine in two, grotesque appendages that overshadowed her, each feather sharp as a needle. Her clothes barely clung to her skeletal body, and she was hunched over, dragging a single chain around her ankle as she moved toward the kitchen. She went straight to the faucet, turning the water on with desperate hands, gulping greedily, her sharp teeth cutting through the metal. Couldn't stand it. When she dropped to her knees, weighed down by her wings, I snapped. I shoved the door open, gasping for air. "Go," I whispered, choking on the words. "Fly. I won't tell Mom." I saw the longing in her eyes, the desperation behind the slight crumple of her lips as she tried to smile. She nodded, heading toward the door, her movements slow, careful. Her wings weren't strong enough to carry her, so I grabbed duct tape, reinforcing the fragile feathers as best as I could. I took off my jacket and draped it over her shoulders, pulling her into a tight hug. She didn't speak. I didn't think she could anymore. Her neck had become more bird-like, too thin, too narrow. I wasn't even sure if she had vocal cords left. "Go," I urged her, my voice barely a whisper. "I'll go get your brother." With a broken smile, she took a step toward the threshold. She was so close to freedom, to the cold air, to the sunlight. Her eyes were wide, filled with tears, yet they sparkled with hope. I watched her spread her wings, lifting them gently as she prepared to fly. Then the knock came. My heart stopped. Panic surged through me, and I slammed the door shut. "Go," I hissed, my voice barely audible. "Go." "Hello?" A voice called from the front door. Footsteps followed. It wasn't Mom. "Frida." I froze, staring at the door as it flew open. Couldn't breathe. There, standing in the doorway, was my old elementary school teacher. Her eyes were wide, frantic, as they locked onto Lily. I watched her step forward, her hands trembling as she covered her mouth, her feet stumbling in horror. "Serena, Serena," my teacher sobbed, her voice breaking as she gazed at Lily's grotesque form. "Oh God, my baby." She stumbled forward, her lip curling as her eyes locked onto the girl's twisted wings. "What did they do to you? What did they do?" Bang! The sound of Lily hitting the patio floor was drowned out by the cold rush of realization slamming into me. My breath caught in my throat as I watched the scarlet stain spread across the ground beneath her. Lily wasn't an angel.
Nina.
Mom's voice rang through the air, sharp and commanding. She stood in the doorway, shotgun in hand. Behind her, Jude's eyes were wild, his mouth gagged by my mother's firm hand. "Mom!" Jude's muffled voice sounded strange, his gaze darting to the teacher crumpled on the floor. His expression contorted, becoming something feral. With a bird-like screech, he lunged forward, but Mom was quick, yanking him back and clamping her hand over his mouth. "Mom!" I choked out, frozen in place as I watched her face twist with a madness I had never seen before. She turned on him, the barrel of the shotgun pressed between his brows. "Stay," she hissed, her voice low and deadly. She ran the barrel of the gun down his bare, bloodied back. His sharp, fleeting glance toward the door didn't escape her notice, and she forced him to his knees, her grip tightening. "Move and I shoot her." Her gaze snapped back to Lily, who wasn't moving. The silence in the room was suffocating. Jude stayed silent, slowly raising his hands in surrender. "Okay?" my mother gasped, her voice strained, her face a twisted mockery of calm. "I want to get several things very fucking clear." In 2 swift strides, she was towering over my old teacher. I watched as she jammed the barrel of the gun into the woman's head, her fingers trembling as she pulled the trigger. The sound of the shot echoed in the room, and the woman's brains splattered against the floor, staining my shoes with scarlet and fleshy pink chunks. The angels didn't react. Lily, lying in her own blood, and Jude, staring at his mother with a dead, emotionless expression. Couldn't breathe. I was aware that I had thrown up on myself, but I couldn't remember moving. The thick, Acidic bile ran down my face as I stared at the gruesome scene before me. "You don't have a mother?" My mother spat, her words dripping with venom as she turned toward Jude. "You're a fallen angel who dropped from the skies thousands of years ago. Now you walk this earth." She cradled his face in her hands, forcing him to look into her eyes. "You saved my daughter. You were my perfect miracle." Her eyes were manic, her smile widening unnaturally. She tightened her grip on his face, forcing him to hold her gaze. "Aren't you?" Jude didn't reply, his lip curled in contempt. Mom's laugh was sharp, almost inhuman. "Adam, you were your mother's worst enemy," she spat, each word full of disdain. "Do you know how much it upset her to see her own son destroy himself right in front of her?" She turned toward Lily. "Serena was a whore of a woman," she continued, her voice bitter. "Every day, I heard her complain about you too. You stole money for drugs, sold her car, used her medication to fuel your disgusting habit." She paused, her eyes narrowing in fury. "Serena was sleeping around, and your own father called you a disgrace. Honestly, Adam, I should have left you to rot in that hotel room." Her fingers dug into his skin, her manicured nails breaking through to the flesh. "Unconscious, drooling, a needle stuck in your veins. How fucking pathetic." Jude cried out, his voice more like a caw than a human scream, trying to jerk free from her unyielding grip. "I should have let you destroy yourself. Let your mother find you unresponsive again," she murmured almost tenderly. Mom stepped back, admiring him as if he were an object. "I gave you wings to save you," she whispered, her voice softer now, almost a sigh. Just then, Dad came through the door, carrying bleach and a body bag, his movements methodical, practiced. Mom must have known my teacher was planning to visit. It felt like a setup, like they were prepared for this moment. I think this was the point where I was supposed to do something, but I was frozen, paralyzed in place, standing in the pool of blood that had once belonged to my teacher, watching the splintered pieces of her skull spill across the floor. Dad hauled the two angels back to the attic, their bodies limp, their wings twisted. I was left with my mother, who seemed unfazed by the horror she'd just created. "Grab me a bucket," she said, her tone casual, as if disposing of a body was as mundane as taking out the trash. I didn't speak to her. Couldn't. Instead, I grabbed my backpack and walked out of the house, my legs shaking. I went straight to the sheriff's office and told him everything. That I had witnessed a murder. That 2 missing college students were hidden in my parents' attic. At first, I don't think they believed me. I shouldn't have led with, "I think my mother turned 2 missing college kids into angels." Officially, Adam and Serena were supposed to be 39 years old. I wasn't sure how to explain how the two of them resembled teenagers, but I was certain I had to try. I sat in the back of the police cruiser, my heart racing as a dozen cops followed me to my house. When we arrived, the house was empty. My parents were gone. The cops broke through the attic door, and it was just storage space. Boxes, old toys, and a DS. The angels were nowhere to be seen. It didn't take long for the cops to turn on me, pointing fingers, accusing me of wasting their time. I was hauled back to the station, interrogated, and lectured. Then I was released. With no choice but to return home, I began my search. Jude and Lily had to be somewhere, hidden away. I couldn't imagine my parents running off with 2 genetically engineered angels. I started in the attic, but all I found were old boxes, ancient toys, and a DS. Mom and Dad were good at covering their tracks. I moved into my parents' bedroom, the air thick with a suffocating sense of dread. At first, there was nothing of importance, but then I crawled under their bed. The floorboards creaked, and there was an odd lump in the carpet, another loose floorboard. I pulled it up, revealing a shallow hole filled with a stack of papers. My hands trembled as I spread the documents across the floor, my eyes scanning over the words that I never wanted to see. Adam and Serena's names appeared repeatedly on the pages. Day 1. Subjects are calm. Neuromuscular blockers administered. I am attempting to make an incision into the spine of the S1. I will update with progress. So far, everything looks good. I flipped through the stack, reading every detail of my parents' sickening progress. 19 years of research, procedures, notes. It didn't stop after Adam and Serena. There were more names. Names I didn't recognize. Names that made my stomach turn. Nathan, Lily, Charlotte, Matthew, Jesse, Victor, Evangeline. A sickening feeling crawled up my throat. Something cold and twisted. If my parents had been experimenting on all these people, where were they now? I dug deeper, my fingers brushing against a file marked with bold red letters. Failed. The documents were covered in the stain of rejection. A sea of red ink, declaring countless lives as failures. Then I felt something. Something warm and soft, almost like feathers. I recoiled in horror, but the moment I did, the ground beneath me rumbled. That soft cry echoed again, the same wail I'd heard before. I couldn't stop myself. I jumped to my feet, frantic, tearing at the walls in search of the source. I stumbled back when the paint became slick, wet with blood and feathers sticking to my palms. A single, dark eye blinked up at me from the shadows, and my heart stopped. Mom was right. She had been wrong about everything. She fucking lied. Jude and Lily weren't angels. They weren't sent to save me. They were my parents' successful attempt to replace what was already living inside the walls of our home. The angel that had become part of the house. Its bones were woven into the very foundation, its blood staining every corner. It was angry. It wanted its children, past and present, back. The walls were crying. The ceilings were crumbling, and the floors were caving in. The angel whispered in my ear. A twisted language, its words contorting my thoughts. It threatened me, promising death if I didn't return its children. But there was something more. Something unsettling. I wondered, are those who failed still here? Hidden away? Trapped inside our house? I paused, considering whether or not to share the rest of this. Last night I couldn't sleep. The pain in my back was unbearable. Sharp, burning lightning bolts running up and down my spine. I couldn't take it anymore. I reached under my shirt to try and relieve the pressure. But when my hand made contact with my skin, I pulled something out. A single feather quill. I can't stop thinking about it. What my parents did to Jude, to Lily, and all those other kids. Am I next?